In the 70s, kids could buy cigarettes, play on train tracks, and even smoke on airplanes. It sounds unbelievable today, but back then it was completely normal. The 1970s were an era of freedom, risks, and a very different set of rules. What people considered harmless fun back then would today be illegal, dangerous, or even unthinkable. So let's take a nostalgic trip and look at 20 shocking things from the 70s that are now banned. Some of these will make you laugh, some will shock you, and some will leave you asking, how did people ever think this was okay? Back in the 70s, kids didn't need video games for adventure. Train tracks were their playground. Children would balance on rails, play chase between wooden ties, or use the tracks as shortcuts to school. Some kids even placed coins on the rails just to watch them get flattened into shiny souvenirs by a roaring train. Parents rarely worried, and train companies barely enforced safety. To most kids, the tracks felt like an endless playground, not a place of danger. It was part of childhood freedom, exploring without rules. But with time came tragedy. Many accidents showed how risky this game really was. Modern trains move faster, brake slower, and make far less noise than in the past. Trespassing on railway property today isn't just unsafe, it's illegal. Fines can be huge, and campaigns constantly remind people, stay off the tracks, trains can't stop quickly. What was once seen as an adventurous childhood memory is now recognized as one of the most dangerous and forbidden activities of all. If you grew up in the 70s, you probably remember the sound clack, clack, clack. These toys were simple, two heavy acrylic balls on a string. The goal? Swing them up and down until they smack together as fast and loud as possible. At first, it was harmless fun and even a kind of skill challenge. Kids would compete to see who could make the loudest clacks or keep the rhythm the longest. But the danger came quickly. Swing too hard, and the balls could smack your hands, arms, or even your face. And worse, some of them shattered into sharp pieces, turning the toy into flying shards of plastic. Hospitals started seeing more and more injuries linked to clackers. Parents complained, schools banned them, and eventually manufacturers were forced to redesign them using softer, safer materials. Looking back, it's wild to think such a simple toy caused so much chaos. But that's exactly why it became one of the most infamous banned toys of the decade. Imagine a summer barbecue in the 70s, kids running around, adults grilling burgers, and in the backyard, people throwing giant sharp metal darts into a plastic ring on the grass. That was lawn darts, also called jarts. The game was supposed to be safe if everyone followed the rules, but reality was very different. Those darts were heavy and had steel tips designed to stick in the ground. One wrong throw or one child wandering into the playing area could turn fun into a nightmare. And sadly, it often did. By the late 80s, after multiple injuries and even deaths, the U.S. government banned sharp-tipped lawn darts completely. Today, if you buy lawn darts, they're rounded and safe, more like beanbags than weapons. For many, lawn darts became the perfect example of how a harmless toy of the past could end up on the list of the most dangerous games ever sold. Every child in the 70s wanted one, the Easy Bake Oven. With a few packets of cake mix and a toy oven powered by a regular light bulb, kids could bake their own little cakes and cookies. The joy wasn't in the taste, which was often mediocre, but in the magic of making it yourself. But here's the problem. That light bulb reached temperatures of over 350 degrees Fahrenheit, 175 degrees Celsius. If a child accidentally touched the inside, it could cause serious burns. Reports of injuries started piling up, with some children even suffering second-degree burns from the toy. By the 2000s, the toy was redesigned with safer heating elements, but the nostalgia remains. For many, it was a childhood dream, but one that came with hidden dangers. This one is almost impossible to imagine today. In the 70s, it was completely normal for children to walk into a corner store and buy cigarettes, often without even being questioned. Some kids carried a handwritten note from their parents. Others didn't need anything at all. Cigarette vending machines were everywhere too, in restaurants, arcades, and even public places where kids had easy access. Smoking was so widespread that society barely noticed. Fast forward to today, and the laws couldn't be stricter. Age checks, ID requirements, heavy fines, and the near extinction of cigarette vending machines have completely transformed the culture. What was once a casual errand for kids is now an unthinkable crime. Yes, you heard that right. In the 1970s, many American high schools actually had designated smoking areas for students. Imagine teenagers openly lighting up between classes, sometimes right next to their teachers, who were also smoking on school grounds. The atmosphere was literally filled with smoke, and nobody thought much of it. Back then, smoking was seen as an adult activity, and teenagers wanted to look grown up. Parents often turned a blind eye, thinking it was just a phase. Even schools believed it was safer to allow smoking in a controlled area rather than have kids sneak cigarettes in bathrooms or behind the gym. But by the 1980s, everything changed. Studies revealed the dangers of smoking, and especially second-hand smoke. Public health campaigns grew louder, and within a decade, smoking areas in schools disappeared completely. Today, the idea of a school providing a spot for kids to smoke is almost unbelievable. Turn on the TV in the 70s, and you'd be flooded with cigarette ads. Marlboro cowboys, glamorous celebrities, suave men smoking in luxury cars. Tobacco companies sold the image that smoking was cool, sexy, and even healthy. Commercials made cigarettes look like an essential part of life, relaxing after work, socializing at parties, or even enjoying the outdoors. Kids and teens grew up surrounded by these images, making smoking seem like the ultimate sign of maturity. But health research soon caught up. By 1971, the U.S. government banned all cigarette ads from television and radio. It was a landmark decision that completely changed the advertising world. Cigarette companies shifted to magazines, billboards, and sports sponsorships. But the golden era of tobacco on TV was gone forever. If you ever flew in the 1970s, you remember the smoke-filled cabins. Airplanes had ashtrays built into every seat, and passengers could smoke throughout the flight. Even though there were smoking and non-smoking sections, the smoke spread everywhere. For flight attendants and non-smokers, it was suffocating. Yet at the time, it was totally normal to light up at 30,000 feet in the air. As awareness of second-hand smoke grew, rules began to change. In 1988, smoking was banned on short domestic flights. By 2000, smoking was completely banned on all U.S. flights. Today, it's hard to imagine being stuck in a metal tube filled with cigarette smoke for hours. Seatbelts are something we take for granted today, but in the 1970s, laws around them were extremely loose. For most drivers, wearing a seatbelt was optional, not mandatory. Many people even believed that seatbelts were dangerous and could trap you in a crash. Even more shocking, many cars didn't even have seatbelts in the back seats. Children often rode standing in the front, sitting on laps, or bouncing around the car without any restraints at all. Family road trips looked carefree, but they were extremely unsafe. It wasn't until the mid-1980s that states started passing mandatory seatbelt laws. Research showed seatbelts reduce the risk of death by nearly 50%. By the 90s, strict seatbelt rules became standard, saving millions of lives. Following up on road safety, child car seat laws were basically non-existent in the 1970s. Parents often just held children on their laps or let them roam freely in the back seat. Yes, there were child car seats available, but they weren't designed for safety. They were more like boosters to help kids see out the window, not protect them in a crash. There were no crash test standards, no safety ratings, nothing. This changed in the 1980s, when studies revealed that car accidents were the leading cause of death for young children. New laws required proper crash-tested child safety seats. Today, strict regulations ensure every child is buckled in safely. But looking back, the lack of rules in the 70s feels almost reckless. In the 1970s, drunk driving was shockingly common, and the legal blood alcohol limits were much higher than today. In many states, you could drive legally with a BAC of 0.10%, or even higher. To put that into perspective, that's several drinks deep for most adults. Having a few beers and then driving home wasn't seen as reckless. It was normal. Friends often laughed it off, and bars rarely discouraged patrons from driving. There was very little public awareness of just how dangerous it was, but as car accidents and fatalities increased, the tide began to turn. Advocacy groups like MADD Mothers Against Drunk Driving pushed relentlessly for change. By the mid-1980s, most states lowered the limit to 0.08% and introduced stricter DUI penalties. Today, driving under the influence is treated as a serious crime. The 70s casual attitude toward drunk driving is now seen as shockingly irresponsible. Flying in the 1970s was a completely different experience. There were no long security lines, no X-ray scanners, no TSA agents yelling about removing your shoes. Passengers could walk straight to the gate, and family members could meet loved ones right at the boarding door. Cockpit doors weren't locked, and some pilots even left them open. People often describe air travel in the 70s as glamorous, easy, and stress-free. But with that freedom came risk. Hijackings skyrocketed. 1972 alone saw over 200 hijacking incidents worldwide. The tragic events of September 11, 2001, completely changed the game. The U.S. government created the TSA, installing strict security checks, locked cockpit doors, and new rules that transformed flying forever. What was once casual and convenient is now one of the most tightly controlled experiences in modern life. Here's one that might surprise younger viewers. In the 1970s, the legal drinking age in many states was just 18. After the voting age was lowered from 21 to 18, the logic was simple. If you're old enough to fight in a war, you're old enough to buy alcohol. So it wasn't unusual to see teenagers legally buying beer or liquor. College campuses and parties were filled with under 21 drinkers who weren't breaking any laws, but the consequences were severe. Drunk driving accidents involving young people skyrocketed. Studies showed that alcohol was a factor in more than 60% of fatal crashes. In 1984, Congress passed the National Minimum Drinking Age Act, pressuring states to raise the age to 21. By 1988, all 50 states complied. It was controversial at the time, but ultimately it saved countless lives. Even though child labor laws existed, they were far more relaxed in the 1970s compared to today. Kids often worked in family businesses, farms, or small shops. Many parents believed that working young taught discipline and responsibility. In rural areas, children frequently worked in fields, handling equipment that was dangerous by today's standards. Some kids worked after school or during summers, not just to earn pocket money, but to help support their families. By the late 70s and into the 80s, stricter labor laws came into place, especially to protect children from hazardous jobs. Internationally, the United Nations also stepped in with conventions to strengthen child protections. Today, child labor is tightly regulated, and seeing children work in dangerous environments would be shocking. But in the 70s, it was just another part of life for many families. The exotic pet craze boomed in the 1970s. Iguanas, macaws, boa constrictors, these were being sold in pet shops with almost no regulation. Owning something unique was seen as trendy, and nobody thought much about the risks. There were no special permits required, and very little oversight about where these animals came from. If you had the money, you could take home a snake or a parrot without question. But as time passed, problems grew. Exotic pets often escaped or were abandoned, sometimes turning into invasive species that disrupted ecosystems. There were also safety risks for owners who had no training in handling dangerous animals. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, most states introduced strict laws requiring permits and licenses for exotic pets. Today, owning one without proper paperwork can result in heavy fines, or worse, confiscation. If you grew up in the 70s, you probably remember candy cigarettes. They looked almost identical to real ones, white sticks with a red tip, sometimes even puffing out a cloud of sugar dust to mimic smoke. Kids loved pretending to be adults, holding them just like real cigarettes, flicking them dramatically, and blowing smoke. Parents didn't see much harm, since smoking was everywhere anyway, on TV, in restaurants, even on airplanes. But as awareness of the dangers of smoking grew, critics argued that candy cigarettes normalized the habit for children. By the 90s, many countries banned or renamed them as candy sticks, removing all cigarette-like designs. Today, it's hard to imagine candy so closely tied to a deadly habit being sold to kids. Almost every gas station in the 70s sold leaded gasoline. People loved it because it boosted engine performance and made cars run smoothly. The smell of exhaust fumes on the street was distinct and dangerous. When burned, leaded fuel released toxic particles into the air. Over time, studies linked it to brain damage, developmental delays in children, and widespread pollution. Entire generations unknowingly inhaled lead on a daily basis. By the mid-70s, the U.S. government began phasing it out, and by the 90s, it was virtually gone. The ban on leaded gas is considered one of the greatest public health victories of the 20th century. It wasn't just in gasoline. Lead was also in the paint on homes, schools, playgrounds, even baby cribs. The bright, glossy colors looked great and lasted for years, but the hidden danger was enormous. Children exposed to lead paint dust suffered from poisoning that caused learning disabilities, organ damage, and severe health problems. For decades, families lived surrounded by it without realizing the risks. In 1978, lead-based paint was officially banned in U.S. homes, but millions of older houses still contain it today, requiring special precautions during renovations. The 70s were full of chemical innovations that later proved harmful. Red dye number 2 was widely used in food until studies suggested cancer risks, leading to its ban in 1976. Cyclamates, an artificial sweetener in diet sodas, were banned in 1970 after lab tests linked them to bladder tumors in animals, though some countries still allow them. Even flame retardants, added to children's pajamas and furniture, were later found to be toxic, linked to cancer and hormone disruption. At the time, people thought these chemicals made life safer. Today, many are tightly restricted or banned altogether. Back in the 70s, buying raw, unpasteurized milk from local farms was common. Many people believed it was healthier and more natural. Families loved the rich, creamy taste straight from the bottle. But raw milk carried hidden dangers. Pathogens like Salmonella and E. coli caused outbreaks of foodborne illness, sometimes leading to hospitalization or worse. In 1987, the FDA banned interstate sales of raw milk, and many states followed with their own restrictions. While a few states still allow it under strict rules, for most of the U.S. it remains banned. What was once a simple household staple is now one of the most controversial banned foods in America. The 1970s were wild. From kids buying cigarettes to smoke-filled airplanes and toxic toys, it's crazy to think how much the world has changed in just a few decades. Which one of these shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this nostalgic trip, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss our next time travel adventure.